With today's session. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on the controversies on convalescent plasma therapy for COVID-19. Considering the lack of efficacious treatment for COVID-19 and the epidemic-like situation that is existing right now, there are not many options available to us for treating COVID-19, as we are all aware. So convalescent plasma is turning out to be something that, more and more healthcare governing bodies such as the ICMR in India and US FDA is recommending as a interventional, investigational new drug. With any new drug, there are a lot of controversies and a lot of problems associated with it. And to address that, we have arranged for this webinar today. So today's webinar will be addressing all of these controversies that are associated with the convalescent plasma therapy. I want to invite all of our speakers for today, Dr. Vishal Rao, Dr. Sachin Jadhav, Dr. Ashish Doot, and Dr. Shalini Nalwar to take us through the various topics that we have lined up for today. So this event is also being streamed live on Facebook and will be shared on our HCG Academics page. Thank you for joining in. Dr. Vishal, sir, are you ready, sir?
Yeah, thank you, Shalini.
Yes,
I'm going to share the slides now.
Yes, sir.
Can you just enable my screen sharing?
Yes, sir, absolutely. One moment. Yes, sir, you can do it now.
And I think we can allow all the people in the waiting room.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Can I share my slide?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Shalini. Shalini, I think let me start off. So I was asked to speak on the topic of plasma therapy and overview of the current scenario. At the outset, I would like to thank both Sachin and Ashish for putting this entire story and weaving this together. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it, but before that, I would like to just introduce ourselves. I'm Dr. Vishal Rao. I'm the Associate Dean for Research and Academics, and part of Dr. Sachin Jadhav and Ashish's team, and assisting them in this plasma therapy initiative. We are representing HCG. HCG is a chain of cancer centers. We are also into general health specialty. We are at about 26 across the world right now. We recently entered into Africa and Vietnam, and we went IPO on 2016. We run an active academics division where we run our fellowships with Royal College, we run our fellowships with the State University, and we have our own in-house fellowships. Today, the idea of discussing this entire topic from my side was just to give a little introduction to the whole story of how this entire thing came along and how we were able to build up the entire efforts on plasma therapy. So quickly in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to give you an update about the need, the gaps, the current efforts and research and innovation in a quick snapshot. So to start with, today, this is the latest bulletin that we had from the government of Karnataka. I'm sorry, this is a slightly old one, but what I wanted to show was currently today stands at about 64,000 odd cases total, and there are about 24,000 odd discharges. Now, if you look at these figures, what we will know is that among the total discharges, there are 23,000 people who are eligible today to donate plasma. Yet the accrual rate in terms of donations today are only at about less than 0.1%, with hardly 25 people in Karnataka donating. And currently there are about 580 patients in the ICU. So in the next coming slides, I think Dr. Sachin and Dr. Ashish Doot are going to present before you the current evidence, the controversies and the gaps related to this entire plasma therapy. We see that a lot of states across the country have embraced plasma therapy. A lot of them are enthusiastic about it, and a lot of them very hesitant. And this is a mixed bag. So the question is, should we go in for it? Should we hold back our guns? Should it be only in the clinical trial settings? Or should we look at it in a more aggressive and off the label way? So these are some of the broad questions that we are here to answer. Now, naturally, the third T in the fight against corona is to treat, and we know that there is no current treatments available in treating the COVID-19 infection effectively. And the only one that has been spoken about with a little affirmation has been the plasma therapy, which is based on historic experiences on H1N1, Ebola, and others. So I'm just going to skip through this. So today, when you look at the entire principles of the efforts that are being done to box it in, I think we're having testing, isolation, finding quarantine. And in this process, there has to be some efforts that we will need to put in to actually look at strategies for planning treatments. So what we know currently at HCG, what we build this, so what we know and what we are aware about is that the left spectrum, which is the early stage, the asymptomatic, the pre-symptomatic stages, to the right is the hyperinflammatory stage where there's a cytokine storm, they are ARDS, they're ventilator dependent. Now, where do we actually intervene and at what phases our plasma intervention is going to really help is going to be something that Sachin will again address in detail and why. So we've just put existing options that are being played a role on. And today the ICMR has created a phase 2 trial which is looking at exploring it in the moderate setting. And our own clinical trial at HCG is trying to address it in the stage, is in the severe stage as well as in the critically ill patients. Now with this entire thing, I mean, I'm going to skip through some of these particular slides on the possibilities of this. But what I'm going to run through is that the HCG's clinical trial that we are currently running is a phase 1 part 2 clinical trial that has been approved by DCGI and registered with the WHO. And we are also having some other ongoing studies, which is on the cytokine cocktail therapy for mild and moderate infections and mesenchymal stem cells for ARDS. And when we actually introduced this particular study and got the permissions, the intent I think was clearly with Sachin backing the whole thing and telling us that we should be the first to make an attempt to actually explore the role of convalescent plasma, considering the potential it has had in H1N1 and in other illnesses. So we actually went ahead and actually applied for this entire clinical trial. So it was a joint effort between me, Dr. Sachin, and Dr. Ashish Doot coming together and applying and taking this, and our entire team, which included our pulmonology experts, our intensivist, Dr. Krupesh, all came together to actually back this whole step up. So our clinical trials team had actually set up an SOP in place to say about how we are going to conduct the entire clinical trial. And there was a lot of learnings in this entire step because this is not a classic standard clinical trial setting. So we had to actually go through each one of these steps was by itself a very comprehensive thing. So for example, donor recruitment. We had a lot of hurdles to understand how do we maintain data confidentiality, what are the key steps that are required in order to protect this data, how are the data systems to be maintained, how do we liaise with the government, what are the permissions that the state government will need to do, because this is a very interesting time. We had to work with the union government, we had to work with the state government, we had to work with the ICMR, and we had to work with the DCGI. There were 4 bodies that we had to work with collectively and yet collaborate and work together. So this particular effort actually brought in a lot of dynamics that we felt we had to learn. There were a lot of process, which again I'm going to discuss a little more in detail on what are the hurdles we faced, how did we overcome these particular hurdles. So we did do the donor placements, recruitments that we did in support with the state government of Karnataka. We partnered with Victoria Hospital. Dr. Jayanti spearheaded this entire initiative, the director of Victoria, and we had the primary investigators, Dr. Ravindra, Dr. Ramesh Revappa, and Dr. Ramesh Revanna, and Dr. Sudesh, who actually led the team from the Victoria Hospital side. So jointly together, we are almost halfway through the trial, and we've had a lot of interesting learnings in terms of building the SOPs, looking at processes in place. Now, one of the interesting hurdles we face, so HCG was the one that collected the plasma, and the plasma was delivered and administered at the Victoria Hospital in the ICUs. And in this process, there was a lot of learnings that I'm going to again share with you in the next coming slides. We also set up an SOP in place with regarding to the discharge of the patients to the follow-up of the patients. What was interesting in this entire setting was we went ahead to actually set up the first virtual clinical trials. Now, this was very important for us because this was not a classical setting where you could actually go into the wards every time and get data. So a virtual monitoring system was actually developed. We used a symmetric system here, which actually was a complete secure online platform, which is based and uses the Azure Microsoft database systems. So it was a completely secure system. And this helped us data monitoring, this helped us in data entry, and also helped us in maintaining confidentiality. The other interesting thing that we did was we had to come up with various IEC materials. One among them is what I'm sharing with you. I'm just going to play this thing. So So what we wanted to share through this was that a lot of these IEC materials were built, and we'll be happy to share this with you, which you can use for your own patient-related awareness systems. So a lot of this was built, and a lot of these IEC programs were created. Then it was at a very critical point that we realized that there was a need for a plasma bank to be created. So there was an expert committee meeting of the COVID task force that was called for, where I had actually presented before the Chief Minister of Karnataka and the Health Minister, emphasizing the role of why we need a plasma bank. Again, this was based on data given to me by Dr. Sachin Jadhav and Ashish, that this is the ideal time that we should build it, because we had about 580 patients, and I'm going to let Sachin speak about the evidence on why we believe that at this juncture we should make every sincere attempt with exact evidences and build up that we should be able to deliver plasma to these patients. So we set up a toll-free number. We have got an IVR separate line for Karnataka where patients can call up and register their requests. We have email address where people can write to, an ICAT team. I think Dr. Shalini Nadwal will again speak to you entirely about how the mission COPE was initiated and spearheaded by her to build up the entire campaign. So they've set up a lot of SOPs in place in this process. There was a lot of positive media campaigns that happened around this, which is very important. If you see, a lot of donors that we contacted were deeply frustrated. There were people who were actually not happy at all about the whole initiative because they were going through their own set of depressions. They were going through their own set of agony, anxiety. There have been, a lot of them had been socially outcast. So there was a lot of psychological things that actually went on, and people were hesitating about donating plasmas or even coming to hospitals. So at this juncture, we had to have actual proper SOPs in place to build up and actually plan, build up and plan certain SOPs, to plan certain programs around how to call these patients up, how do we counsel these patients. There were a lot of steps that were taken up and built on this. A lot of campaigns were supported. Our Deputy Chief Minister, members of Parliament joined hands together to actually build this entire campaign, and that's how we actually arrived at working on this. And some of the important things that we learned through the process was also regarding that we don't have, for example, information on the neutralizing antibody titers. We had a lot of information which we required, which I believe were very essential for conducting the thing. So currently our team is also building some amount of work on trying to understand what are the neutralizing antibody titers. Currently in India, we don't have the neutralizing antibody titer machinery because it requires a BSL-3 facility and a live virus. So what we are currently doing is looking at, we have got some assistance from the DRDO scientists, we've got some experts from the ITPT ministry helping us look at our own system to build a titer, which we hopefully will build in another couple of weeks. And that should be able to give us more tangible results. But till that time, we are looking at IgG titers and measuring it. And we put up an SOP in place, which I think Dr. Ashish is going to speak more about. So I'm not going to take too much time more than this, but just going to put special thanks to everybody who have played a role in this, and leave you all with some good thoughts on these efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I think.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So I think you've given us now an overview of what has been happening from our side on plasma therapy and how we've set up the plasma bank. I think to move on to the evidences that are currently present for use of convalescent plasma therapy for COVID-19, I would like to invite Dr. Sachin Jadhav, sir. Dr. Sachin Jadhav is the group head for BMT and for bone marrow transplant for HCG hospitals. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Shalini. Thank you so much, Vishal. Dr. Vishal Rao has been personally spearheading his efforts into trying to control, manage, treat, handle this entire pandemic in whatever way that we can. The contributions that he has made in engaging government, regulatory bodies, trying to bring everybody together, ensuring that we work on several fronts, both in terms of collecting the data. He has been advising the government, he's been advising other regulatory bodies, he's put together clinical trials, and what seems to have come out of all of this is probably the way we understand today. Convalescent plasma is one of the things, one of the treatment modalities that is available to us. Now, however, this is the world of evidence-based medicine. And every time we think of any new therapy, we have to first think of whether there is any evidence, there is any backing to adopt that therapy into our practice. When it comes to COVID, this disease, this pandemic has taken the entire world by storm. All of us are aware about the chaos that has been caused across the world. The disruption of normal life, the disruption of work, everything has taken the whole world off guard. So when we started looking at convalescent plasma therapy, and Dr. Vishal first created the phase 1-2 clinical trial, as part of the trial, we have done infusions for 7 patients, and we have 7 controls. The trial still has to go down a long way before we can analyze and interpret this data. Meanwhile, on the horizon, there have been other therapies in terms of steroid therapy, the tocilizumab group of drugs, which has been given for cytokine release syndrome, remdesivir, lopinavir, etc. All of these have come up, and today we have a better understanding of how to use these various treatment modalities in practice. This was when we realized that it's time for us to understand what place does convalescent plasma therapy hold in the armamentarium, which is available to us for treating COVID-19. Let me first start by asking the question, addressing the question of what is convalescent plasma. And essentially, plasma, as we all understand, is the acellular component of blood. It is the fraction of blood which can be obtained either by collecting a bag of blood from a donor and then centrifuging it so that the RBCs, WBCs, and platelets can be removed, and what is left is the acellular plasma. Or the second way of collecting plasma is by apheresis, which is by using a piece of equipment, a machine called as an apheresis machine. The donor is connected and the stems, the plasma is harvested. There are 2 techniques, and Dr. Ashish will be talking more about this. By whichever technique we are able to harvest the plasma, if it is done from a person who has recovered from COVID-19, who is currently in the convalescent stage, and thus may harbor antibodies which will fight this infection, right? These antibodies should typically have the property of neutralizing the virus. So we harvest a plasma from a donor who is already recovered and is in the convalescent stage, and infuse them into a recipient. And hopefully these antibodies will neutralize the virus in the recipient. That essentially is what is convalescent plasma. Now, the next question is, how does this convalescent plasma work, and why did people attempt this therapy? Fortunately for us, just today, a paper was, last month, a paper was published in Cell, which showed us the structure of the convalescent antibody. What they essentially did is they took convalescent plasma and they looked at the structure in a three-dimensional model, both by computerized modeling as well as by actual analysis by electron microscopy. And they realized that the antibodies IgG and IgM, both which are present in convalescent plasma, have specific domains, and these domains can attach to the spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Now, this spike protein is critical in the pathogenesis of this disease, and when the antibody connects to the spike protein, it is expected that it will help to protect the patient from the problems that the virus creates in the body. However, just looking at the structure, a three-dimensional structure of the antibody does not predict anything. I mean, it may help us predict or hypothesize, but is there real biological plausibility? If there is no biological plausibility, truly nobody wants to try out that therapy. A prime example is hydroxychloroquine. When there was an initial recommendation that maybe HCQS can help prevent or treat COVID-19, it was met with skepticism. What is the biological plausibility? How can a malaria or a rheumatology drug, for that matter, work against a viral infection? Similarly, we have to look at biological plausibility for convalescent plasma and how it might help to save a patient or help a patient from, or provide early cure for patients. So like I said, the neutralizing antibodies bind to the viral spike protein, and thus it prevents the virus from interacting with its receptor. It's understood now that the ACE2 receptor, which is there in the lungs, which is also there in the gut, there are certain receptors in the gut to which the virus binds. So the antibody will attach to the spike protein and thus prevent it from engaging it with its receptor. The other thing that is hypothesized, and there is some in vitro data to this effect, is that the antibody may block the conformational change in spike protein and thus prevent its fusion to the host cell membrane in our body. Thus, essentially what we are passing on is passive immunization. The key problem with COVID-19 is it is a new virus. It is extremely contagious. It is much more contagious than routine seasonal influenza virus. And because it is so contagious and because it is a new virus, humans do not have immunity against it. We do not have immunity against it, because of which this has turned into a pandemic which is spreading so rapidly. What we are trying to do with convalescent plasma is impart this immunity, impart passive immunity, and thus hope that it will decrease the viral burden in the recipient. So this essentially is the biological plausibility. And based on this, what was thought is many people looked at whether convalescent plasma has worked in other diseases in the past. And of course, now we have SARS-CoV-2. Previously, we had SARS and MERS viral infections, which are close to becoming pandemics. There is some data from that time, although not large data set, although not robust data, But there has been a meta-analysis of about 32 studies which showed that convalescent plasma during the SARS and MERS infections reduced the death rate, especially amongst those people who were critically ill. It was also found that the earlier you treat a patient with convalescent plasma, the results are probably better. Why? Maybe because when the disease reaches a critical stage, we may have crossed the point of no return. The patient might be in a phase of the disease where whatever you do is not going to work. Hence, probably if we give any treatment, and convalescent plasma being one of these earlier in the disease, maybe it reduces, it gives better effect. A similar data by way of meta-analysis was published for the Spanish flu infection, and even in that it was found out that the convalescent plasma does decrease mortality. So we've looked at biological possibility, we've looked at previous experience with convalescent plasma in other similar respiratory infections, and based on that there are a lot of randomized control trials going on. As of now there are over 50 RCTs going on. Of course there's a lot of retrospective and prospective data collection that is happening other than these randomized control trials. And this is just one of the a snapshot of one of the more recent papers about the 50 randomized control trials which are going on. All of this is available in the public domain in the clinical trials database. All right, so we have seen what is known for other diseases. We've looked at biological plausibility. We are looking at the different research which is happening. But what do we know as of now? Do we have enough knowledge? Do we have enough information to use this therapy in our patients, in our friends and our relatives, right? Today, all of us know somebody who is infected with COVID-19. And we are aware that majority of the infections are mild. A small proportion of patients will actually become hypoxic, and even smaller proportion will go on the ventilator. And in whom should we use? Does it really help? Do we have any data on the current viral infection? So let us first understand who are the people from whom convalescent plasma is collected. And of course, Ashish will give more details about this, but I'll briefly like to mention that when you use the right kind of donor, 99% of donors have measurable antibody in their plasma. 88% have neutralizing antibodies, right? And Vishal mentioned some time ago that today in our country, we do not have the facility to measure neutralizing antibodies. Nevertheless, there is good data that 88% of convalescent plasma does have neutralizing antibodies. We also know that these antibody levels decline over 3 months. Hence, we have to collect convalescent plasma early in the recovery phase. We have to encourage recovering patients to donate early rather than late, because the antibody levels in their blood would go down over a period of 3 months. We ensure that we give ABO blood group compatible plasma. So this is the basis of taking plasma from donors. And now let us see how does it help. There are a lot of papers, case reports, case series, a couple of meta-analysis. We don't have too much, maybe just two meta-analysis on the effect of rather the benefit of or no benefit of convalescent plasma in COVID-19. I've selected two important papers. The first one from Mayo Clinic, and mind you, these are recent papers. Both were published just this month. From Mayo Clinic, we have a paper of 31 patients without a control group. Mind you, they've reported data on 31 patients. 16 had severe disease, which means they were requiring oxygen, and 15 had life-threatening disease, which means that they were on ventilators, right? So all pretty bad patients, 31 patients. Their overall mortality in these 31 patients was 27%. So 4 patients died. Now, what they saw in the 16 severe patients, who were not yet on ventilator, they were able to avoid intubation in 94% of patients. And 67% of those who were already intubated came off the ventilator. Now, we are aware that in a disease like COVID-19, once somebody goes on a ventilator, the chances of them recovering, coming off ventilator, and that too coming off early, because the recovery may be protracted, the recovery may take time, right? However, there is good data to show that even those who are intubated, already intubated, once they receive convalescent plasma, along with other standard of care, mind you, along with other standard of care, about 67% of those get extubated. Now, fortunately for us, we also had one paper coming from Iran, which was a multi-center prospective data collection, data analysis, you can show that some patients benefit. But what happens when you compare those who have received convalescent plasma with those who have not received, they've only received standard of care? Is there any difference in outcome? Does it really help? Yes, the mortality in the plasma group was 10% less compared to those who received all the other standard of care except plasma. Now, mind you, these numbers are considered to be still small, and the p-value was not significant. It was 0.09, if I'm not mistaken. But look at the percentage, right? 14% mortality in plasma group, 24% in control group. And there is a feeling that if you accrue enough patients in both the plasma and control group, the p-value should become significant. Now, compare these percentages with the dexamethasone study which got published, right? Based on which everybody is saying that, dexamethasone is the standard of care. But if you look at that, it improves outcomes by 4%. 28% comes down to 24%, right? On 4% improvement of outcome, because there is a statistically significant p-value, we tend to adopt that treatment. However, when you actually give specific passive immunization with convalescent plasma, the improvement is to the tune of 10%. Now, in the plasma group, 7% got intubated, whereas in the control group, 20% got intubated. And look, this is a significant p-value. So yes, convalescent plasma seems to decrease. It seems to decrease the number of people who actually go on the ventilator, which is very critical in our country. All of us are aware that we are a developing country. We do not have the infrastructure. We do not have enough beds. All of us are on a daily basis hearing about patients who are going from one hospital to another because they don't have beds. Leave alone ICU beds, which have become a rare commodity now. Our physician friends
So I think you're muted.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
So our country doesn't have enough ward beds. We do not have enough ICU beds. Our physician friends are getting sick and tired of daily phone calls, which they are getting requests from friends and family and people whom they know, calling them, requesting them to admit a patient, but they don't have beds. So imagine if you have a therapy which can decrease the number of people who get intubated. If you have therapy which can discharge patients faster. So is that really happening with convalescent plasma? Let's see what more do we have with the evidence right now. Sorry, my PowerPoint seems to have frozen. Just give me a minute, please. Yeah. From the same paper, if you see the total number of admission days, the number of days that the patient stayed in the hospital was 9.5 days in the plasma group and close to 13 days in the control group. So if you can discharge a patient 3 days in advance, that bed becomes available for somebody else, for a more deserving patient. And 28% of patients in the plasma group could be discharged within 5 days. So your average duration of stay comes down. The number of patients who have a faster turnaround, who can get discharged in 5 days, is 28% in the plasma group, whereas it is less than 10% in the plasma group. Again, statistically significant p-values. It decreases mortality. Like I told you, this did not reach statistical significance, but there is a 10% reduction. And probably when we are able to see larger data sets, we will also see a reduction in mortality, which will be statistically significant. So, well, this therapy seems to help in one way or the other, and probably it is important in our clinical scenario in our country. But how much time does it take once you infuse plasma? Many patients start responding within 1 day. Their oxygen requirement comes down, they start feeling better, right? Typically, it takes up to a week for patients to respond. And the maximum benefit is when this is given before intubation. Remember this, once a patient has gone beyond a time of no return, the benefit is not so much. So earlier in the disease, preferably in the first 2 weeks of the disease, once you infuse, it takes about 1 to 7 days for this treatment to show some benefit. Many doctors are worried about TRALI. They're worried about what happens when you give plasma. Will it worsen the oxygen requirement? What if somebody has an allergic reaction? What if somebody has a transfusion-related acute lung injury? Leave convalescent plasma aside. Okay, leave convalescent plasma aside. Let's look at patients who receive plasma. Now, I'm a hematologist, and it is very well known that the incidence of TRALI is 1 in 10,000 people. 1 in 10,000 people. What actually happens in somebody who has a pneumonia, who has a respiratory viral infection? Is the incidence more? We do not know. However, one of the more recent meta-analysis, which is available in the Cochrane database, out of a total of 5,211 patients, a TRALI-like clinical syndrome was reported in only 1 individual. So imagine a serious reaction happening in 1 in 5,000 people versus 20-30% of patients benefiting, right? So this seems to be a safe therapy even in patients who are on the ventilator. Even in patients who have bad lungs, it doesn't seem to produce major harm. So in which patients is this indicated? In my mind, nobody is wiser than WHO, and nobody is more rigid than the US FDA. So if we look at the US FDA criteria for who should get convalescent plasma therapy, the first statement, of course, is you should have a confirmed COVID-19 infection. Sure. But then whom do we give it to? Should we give it to everybody who is positive? No. Those patients where the oxygen saturation is dropping. So anybody and everybody whose oxygen saturation on room air is less than or equal to 93% is a candidate for convalescent plasma therapy as per US FDA. Okay. Now there are some patients whose saturation hasn't dropped, but their respiratory rate has gone up, or they are feeling short of breath. Even they are candidates. Now it is important to identify these people early. It is important to identify and plan convalescent plasma therapy early. And not only because it benefits if given early, but because you have to identify a donor. As of now, we do not have a plasma bank in this country. Dr. Vishal Rao is trying to set up a plasma bank, and it will take us some time, right? Until then, you have to identify a donor who will be blood group matched, who's willing to donate. So you have to identify the people early. The moment somebody starts requiring oxygen, they are breathless, their respiratory rate is more than 30, and their saturation on room air is less than 93%. They are candidates. Do we give it to patients who have life-threatening disease? They are already on ventilator, they have multi-organ dysfunction? Yes. Yes, we should give it, right? It is not a good idea to say, you know, this patient is already on multi-organ dysfunction. I don't know, I don't think plasma will work. Please give it, because it seems to pull out 65, 2 out of 3 patients come off the ventilator when you give this. Now, what happens in patients who have already terminal or presumably terminal multi-organ dysfunction? We don't know. But then these patients have a high mortality. And the current recommendation seems to be, yes, we should attempt convalescent plasma therapy in these patients as well. Thank you. That's all from me. Over to you, Shalini.
Thank you, sir. Before we get into more discussion, sir, there's a question from Dr. Sunil that I'm putting out to you as well as to the other speakers. So the question is that since HCG has a plasma bank now, after the clinical trials have concluded, will this convalescent plasma from the bank be given to other patients as an off-label, use? If so, how is the DCGI mandatory norm of 1:640 titer of IgG antibodies against the spike protein for off-label use of convalescent plasma adhered to?
Yes, so we are setting up a plasma bank. We hope to be able to connect significant numbers of bags of plasma, so that we can support the patients who are in ICU, who are requiring oxygen. It is available for off-label use with increasing data which is available with the work that Dr. Vishal Rao has done. The government of Karnataka has given us permission to give off convalescent plasma to patients outside a trial setting as well. Now, when it comes to neutralizing antibody titer, that is currently not available in India. Although DCGI did initially say that the antibody titer should be 1:640, that technology is currently not available. It is not possible. And based on whatever data is available, 88% of the bags have enough antibodies. So current recommendation from the government is that it can be used for off-label purposes. For every patient outside a trial setting, it is recommended. I mean, it can be used. And at the same time, antibody titer is not mandatory. However, we are storing samples of plasma for doing a post hoc antibody titer analysis later. But today, antibody titer tested plasma bags are not available. Whatever is available, we are giving it.
Right, sir. Thank you. Dr. Vishal, sir, would you like to make a comment as well?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add it to what Sachin said. So when we actually initially started discussing Sachin, this is one of the first queries we actually bumped across. And based on which you had contacted NIV, we had discussed this entire thing on how can we do this neutralizing antibody titer. So following this, that is just to answer the query by Dr. Sunil, we had actually reached out to the government of India, to the DCGI office also, asking the same query that it is not available. So what do we do? So if you see the current guidelines that they have recommended, in the prerequisites, they have said that you have to either have plasma IgG antibodies or you have to have the neutralizing antibody titers as per the specific value. So what we are currently maintaining is to do the IgG antibodies, and at least that way through the plasma IgG antibody titers. So we have a scoring system based on which we get the score that gives a pointer towards having IgG antibodies and to what unit levels. So it has got low, moderate, high. So we are preferably looking at high IgG antibody titers, if not that, the moderate ones, but not the low ones. So this is the closest we can get to IgG antibody titers. But for the neutralizing antibody titers, what we are looking at, we are currently developing a technology which we are hopefully going to be having by the another 15 to 20 days or within a month, that we will be able to hopefully democratize and show it to everybody, wherein we will be able to give directions based on these machines. Sachin, is that?
Yeah, I agree. Within the limitations of the available technology and with the currently available data based on international studies, this is what we have, and we should go ahead with this therapy for eligible patients.
Right, sir. Right, thank you. So also some of the controversies that are also present, or there are concerns regarding when is it safe, what is the timing at which the plasma should be administered to a patient. you've already mentioned that the two studies that have studied that, it was very efficacious in severely ill patients, but the timing of when it should be administered, and also the quantity, because of course the guideline right now is to use about 200 ml. But could you comment on that as well a little bit?
Yeah. So one timing is therapy, convalescent plasma therapy should be considered in everybody who is hypoxic, or in everybody who is hypoxic, and also in patients who are not hypoxic but are breathless right now. Respiratory rate is more than 30. That is as far as the timing is concerned. Now, what was the second question, Charlie? Remind me again.
Yes, sir. So the second was regarding the dosage of plasma. Dosage.
Yeah, dosage. Right. So yeah. So when we yeah. So when we were planning, when we were planning the clinical trial, we were not, nobody knew what the dosage was. We still don't know. There are groups which have given 200 ml a day for 2 days, right? There are groups who have given up to 8 infusions of 500 ml. Initially, we thought that because we don't have neutralizing antibody titer, we will give 500 ml to give a benefit of doubt to our patients, to give them the maximum benefit. However, with the increasing requirement of plasma that we are seeing, our group has now decided to collect 600 ml of plasma per donor and allocate it into 3 bags of 200 ml each. So what we are planning to do from now on is give 200 ml per patient for a recipient. And if the doctor feels that it needs to be repeated on a second day or third day, then they can place another request to us. But currently we are looking at 200 ml of infusion at a time. You're on mute, Shalini. We can't hear you.
Sorry. So there are a lot of other questions that have come up. So Dr. Swadeep, I think from ICAT, asks, what are the roadblocks in getting antibody titer testing done? Is it the assay or raw materials or testing equipment unavailability?
Yeah, so I think Vishal has already answered this. The roadblocks are for us to get a neutralizing antibody titer, you need a BSL-2 lab. And those labs, even National Institute of Virology, Pune did not have it. So that the core roadblock was technological. Now there are ELISA kits which are coming in, which are giving us a semi-quantitative report of negative, low level titer, moderate or high level titer. That is what is currently available. Published recovery rates across stages of patient condition.
Just wanted to make a point on a lighter note. Raw material is the easiest. Is the virus. You got a whole
Published recovery rates, like I said, majority, more than 90% of patients who are not on ventilator recover within about 10 days or so. And those who go on the ventilator, 2/3 of those seem to be recovering in the convalescent plasma group.
Sachin, just to add to the point, yesterday, Swadeep, me and Sachin were discussing this. If you broadly want to categorize, in the moderate category, as high as 100% of them, all of them have recovered. In the severe category, which means people who are breathless in the ICU but not on a ventilator, not intubated, in that group, as high as 85% of the people have recovered. And in the group which is critically ill, if you see, minimum of 50% of the people would have recovered. To some of the studies which Sachin showed were higher.
Yeah. Agreed. I think the next question is on how long can plasma be stored. I think we should allow Ashish to make his presentation, because he will be discussing these points.
Yes, sir, but there are more questions for you. So what is the published recovery rates across stages of patient condition and across the country or world? This is also from...
So that's exactly, that's what me and Vishal just now discussed, that patients who are just requiring oxygen, not yet in the ICU, all right? They're requiring nasal oxygen, close to 100% of them are recovering with plasma. They have been moved to ICU because they need high flow oxygen, but they are not yet on ventilator. About 94% are recovering. in 94%. And those who are already on ventilator, 2/3, that is 50 to 65% of patients seem to be coming off the ventilator once they are given plasma, because you are giving immunity, right? Essentially, this virus is killing people because there is no immunity. And you are correcting that one single problem which is deficient in that patient, and that is lack of immunity. By giving plasma, you're correcting it.
Right, sir. We have Pavan from COVID India campaign who asks, once convalescent plasma is inside, how soon does it multiply? So basically he wants to know how soon are the antibody titers enough to neutralize the virus completely?
Yeah. So the plasma does not multiply. We are giving a certain immunity, a certain quantum of immunoglobulin through that plasma, whether you give 200 ml or 500 ml. It starts working within 1 day in some patients. In some patients, repeat administrations are required, but generally within a week or so, patients seem to respond to convalescent plasma.
Another question, I'll ask this of Dr. Ashish Dut once he's done. So there is a question again on whether a plasma recipient can donate one after recovery.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I am sure once completely recovered, RT-PCR negative, I think it would be wonderful if a recipient can then become a donor. And scientifically, it is certainly possible.
Dr. Sunil again wants to know, are there several confounding factors when efficacy of convalescent plasma is being analyzed? Though there are trends, are there any clinical trials in India which have proved efficacy?
Yeah, there are going to be confounding factors, there is no doubt. And the biggest challenge in analyzing data on COVID is every patient, literally every patient and every center has a different protocol for treatment. Every center around the world has their own protocol. When do somebody monitors CRP, somebody monitors IL-6 level, somebody monitors only clinically. Some people are being treated with DEXA, somebody is giving methylprednisolone or remdesivir. So there is a gamut of treatment and testing, and nobody really knows what to do. So yes, confounding factors are going to be there when we actually start getting data. But the way the research and healthcare community in the world has come together to manage COVID-19, we are pretty certain that in the next couple of months, we'll start seeing robust data. Are there clinical trials in India? Yes, like Dr. Vishal said, ours was the first phase 1 trial. It is still accruing. ICMR has done a wonderful job of having a multicentric trial. These are the two systematic studies which are in process, at least that I am aware of, and the data will come out. But from whatever data is available, this seems to be a valid treatment that we can go ahead with.
So Dr. Maria wants to know, how would you correlate the CLIA reactive score with the IgG titer or scoring? How do you correlate CLIA reactive score?
I don't know. Maybe I don't know what is CLIA reactive score. If Vishal or Ashish are aware, they can.
Dr. Ashish,
I will answer that. Yeah. I will answer that in my presentation.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. Okay. The other question is from Dr. Saumya from physiotherapy. Can convalescent plasma be taken from an asymptomatic carrier?
Oh, certainly.
Asymptomatic patient.
Yeah. So there is good data to show that asymptomatic people who are infected but have remained asymptomatic also have robust antibody titer. Yes, it can be taken. You are again gone on mute, Shalini.
Thank you so much, sir, for the presentation. We'll move on to the next presentation by Dr. Ashish Dut, who is the program director of the Plasma Bank at HCG, and he's also an immunohematologist and a blood bank physician. Welcome, Dr. Ashish Dut, sir.
Good afternoon. Hi, I hope I'm audible there.
Yes, sir, you are.
Yeah. Hi. So we'll be discussing, mine will be a very small presentation regarding the requirements for convalescent plasma banking. What are the details, things we require for collecting and storing of the plasma. And the storage collection requirements, the first and the most important requirement is having a plasmapheresis license which is valid. Most of the blood banks do have it, but please, we have to ensure that they are valid, in the sense like nobody wants to start collecting the plasma and then the drug controller comes and knocks at your door that your validity is expired already. The next requirement is obviously an apheresis machine with a backup machine. Like sometimes the machines do have troubles. These are after all electromechanical things and they do break up. So having a backup machine is always required. Any type of apheresis machine will be okay. We have a lot of multiple types of manufacturers available, and any type of apheresis machine which can have a plasmapheresis protocol in that will be useful. Definitely the technical expertise to perform the plasmapheresis, we should be knowing how to do the procedure, and then manpower is the most important thing. So backup manpower, like if some person is absent today, some staff, we cannot stop the process, so we should have adequate backup manpower. Anti-COVID IgG test with titer or quasi-titer. Now, this has been a bone of contention for us for very long, and as you see that the drug controller gave this information that they wanted a titer to be done with 1:640 titers to be available. But sadly, they gave the recommendation, but they never gave us the kit. The kit is not yet available in India at all. Entire India, nobody. I was in talk with a lot of transfusion medicine faculty around the country, and nobody has got the kit. So a quasi titer has definitely come up. So with this quasi titer, we are doing the chemiluminescence based immunosorbent assay in our facility, and where we are testing the anti-COVID IgG antibodies. Now these do give up relative light units, the RLUs, in which they will give as has already been discussed, like it will give us a mild, moderate, and high antibodies. But definitely there is no right now correlation that the antibody which is being shown there is having equal or a mathematical correlation with the titers. So this titer is exactly not available in India, and I don't think this titer will be available in next 3-4 months, by which lakhs of more people would have been affected already, and more and more thousands of deaths would have also have happened. So that's why a lot of transfusion medicine doctors have written to the drug controller to advise either to make these titer kits available through importing or manufacturing, or at least allow us to go ahead. And the response has been that we have to go ahead if we are doing this quasi titer or the similar titer like in a chemiluminescence based immunosorbent assay. Rapid kits have also been available against the spike protein, but though they are again qualitative and no quantity is being shown by them. So having a CLIA makes us better to do with that. Again, some of the donors do actually have more of IgM and IgA antibodies, and rather than IgG, though they have recovered. And as Dr. Sachin showed, that 88% had anti-COVID antibodies. So then these 12% fall under those high IgM and IgA antibodies, but then these will not be the most efficient donors, and so we have to mandatorily do some sort of antibody testing, which we have been doing against IgG antibodies, and if they are there, definitely we should be able to go ahead. So this is, and there was a question like any correlation. So right now there is no correlation. Very few diagnostic vendors have been able to provide it. Orthoclinical Diagnostics is one of them, but they are also not able to give us any sort of direct mathematical correlation with them. Then the next item is obviously sterile connecting device in case we want to split the plasma. And the storage requirements, as we all know, it will be minus 18 degrees Celsius deep freezer, though we are storing at minus 80 degrees. If we are able to store at minus 18, then normally the plasma is stored for 1 year as being the expiry, and it has US FDA and our drug controller has both mentioned that with minus 18 degrees deep freezer, the expiry will be 1 year, which was one other question from one of our participants. The plasma for regular patients cannot be kept together with the convalescent plasma, and so there has to be a place where the convalescent plasma is being stored separately, so that these are not issued by mistake to any other patients, though we agree that they are from recovered donors and they will not be having a potential to they should not be transferring the virus, though since there is still a potential, so that's why it should be ensured that they are stored separately. And then definitely we should have a 24/7 plasma issue capability, because we never know what time the patient requires it. The clinician just gives us a call in the middle of the night, and we should be able to respond to it immediately. So these are the collection and storage requirements. That's it. We will be able to answer the questions now.
Sir, I think most of the questions that were asked you already covered in your presentation. So one thing that a lot of people have asked is that does any center with an apheresis machine, can they potentially harvest plasma and store plasma as well?
If they are having a license, they can.
Yeah, so
yeah, earlier trial was definitely mandatory, and people had to be registered either in their own trial through a drug controller or through ICMR. But now the drug controller has allowed it to be used for everybody. There is another question which I can see, that is RT-PCR after 48 hours before 48 hours mandatory for issue of the plasma?
Right.
Currently, US FDA has told no, it's not required. If the after 14 days of recovery, the person can donate the plasma without any repeat RT-PCR. And considering the less availability of the kits in India, and if so many donors waiting to donate, so that aspect also helps us out. And the drug controller also has not mentioned anything about repeating a test. This all is available online on the US FDA site and the drug controller's letter to the medical community.
Right. Another question that has been asked is what is the criteria for selecting a donor?
So the criteria for selecting a donor, yeah. So the donor obviously should have a positive documented infection through RT-PCR, or even if not done RT-PCR at that time, the US FDA allows them to be donating if later on they are showing to be having a positive IgG antibody. So people who were asymptomatic earlier and due to contact tracing later they were found to be infected and having IgG antibodies, they can also donate. So this is the first criteria, that they should be having some sort of infection, and they should be meeting all the other parameters required for apheresis, like they should be having a minimum body weight of 60 kgs, a good vein, hemoglobin more than 12.5, platelet counts 1.5 lakhs. They should be not on injectable insulin, oral hypoglycemics, oral antihypertensives, all are adequate, but yeah, their hypertension and diabetes should be under control. And they are not on any anti-epileptics and other medications are commonly which we use in the plasma pheresis, in any sort of apheresis. The same guidelines apply to here also. They should have at least 14 days. The 14 days should have been gone over after the RT-PCR was done. If not done, then we can wait for 28 days for their immunity to mature, and therefore an infection to completely go away. By maturation of immunity, I want to mean that their antibody titers go up high, and the IgM gets converted to IgG in proper amount, so that they are having enough IgG for themselves also, and enough IgG for to be donated also. Again, there is no the upper limit has been mentioned by some of the authors as 3 months. There is no direct proof, but it has been seen that the IgG starts going down by that time. So we usually prefer first 2 months as the best period, most fertile period for a donor to donate. After the in the third month, we prefer them less, but if they are having adequate IgG, which has now come up, we can monitor through ELISA, through chemiluminescence and both ELISA. Then if we are finding them having adequate antibodies, they can donate even later stage at later date also. There was a question like for somebody who has been transfused with convalescent plasma, can they donate? Right now, though technically, as Dr. Sachin said, there is no reason why they should not donate. But there is something called for anybody who has received blood transfusion, any sort of blood transfusion, they cannot donate blood for next 1 year, considering that they had exposure of some foreign human origin protein, which can potentially be harboring HIV and all. though we understand that we are doing a very high sensitive tests like CLIA and nucleic acid testing and others, but even with them, the window period never falls to zero. There is always a small window period, and because of that, the current blood donation guidelines mention that person who has received blood cannot be a donor for next 1 year. So sadly, if we can take, we may take, but again, there may be some controversies, like if somebody has received a plasma and donating plasma. So there's the need that we have to motivate more and more and more people who have recovered. There are 26,000 people who have recovered, and maybe a few hundred, a handful of people who have been transfused. So let's aim our resources to motivate others who have not received the plasma, and let's get them as much as possible to donate the plasma.
Right, sir. There is a question, a very interesting question from Dr. Sunil. I'm sorry, sir, the settings do not allow me to unmute you. But the question that has been asked is that when many countries are harvesting convalescent plasma from whole blood, is CP harvesting only by apheresis not limiting availability in India with necessary am I audible? Hello?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, with the necessary expensive equipment and consumables and expertise that are required, besides the high cost, why are transfusion services not providing CP from whole blood?
Yeah, I will like to answer that. Ashish here. As per WHO, definitely whole blood can also be used in your lower social economic status countries and middle socio-economic status countries like India. We can definitely use whole blood. People can do it definitely, but the only thing is that when you are collecting 450 ml and then you are taking 200 ml of plasma from that, and we are discarding the rest of the 250 ml of red cells from the donor. So this donor can. So one thing, we are discarding some blood from them. Second thing is that this donor will not be available for us for the next 3 months. While in apheresis, we are getting 500 ml, 600 ml of plasma at a go. 500 ml usually we are taking, so we can get which we can split and give for multiple patients. Second, this donor will be available after 14 days again to donate plasma. If the antibody titers are again of adequate in amount, then they can donate again. So definitely we can take from whole blood and discard the red cells. This has been done in some African countries in some trials which have been shown, and WHO allows that. But having an apheresis has an upper hand. If some center does not has it and they are requiring plasma for a very sick patient, then definitely they can go ahead with that also. It's allowed, but then they should be having the license to make regular FFP, regular plasma. And if they are having the license to make regular FFP or plasma, then they can use this also.
Right, sir. So continuing on the question, Dr. Sunil also wants to know what is the necessity of a plasma bank? If every blood bank with apheresis facilities equipped to store large amounts of plasma, why should plasma banks, specialized plasma banks exist?
Yeah, can I take that?
Yes, sir.
So, what's happened to the videos? Some issue. Okay. So, just wanted to give a quick note on that. See, that's a very good point. Now, there are two important things in this. One is that not all the apheresis places where they have apheresis, do they have a license? So, you need a proper license, not only just an apheresis machine, you need to have a license by the drug controller to conduct plasmapheresis. I think Dr. Ashish will elaborate more on that. The second important point is, today, if you want to set up a plasma bank, like Ashish showed in his last slide, it is not just enough to have plasma. Where are you going to get the plasma from the donors? Where are you going to get the donors from? You'll have to get them from the government, or you'll have to run a proper campaign, setting up a bank to create mass media awareness to people to say, come and donate here. That requires either a proper IEC campaign, or it requires full support of the government. Ideally, you require both. And currently what we did was we actually brought in both, so that we are able to set up a complete comprehensive bank, and that took us almost a month. So that is why it is not easy to set up a plasma bank everywhere. And I think Ashish can add more to this.
Yes, sir, you are correct, sir. And as Dr. Sunil asked, yes, every nook and corner blood banks who are having a license in our country are currently now required to scale up to the level, because a single plasma bank in a state will not be able to provide everybody in the entire state, definitely. And we need, it's a combined effort required from all of the blood banks in India with the licensing thing. Yes, but still, as Dr. Vishal just pointed out, that there is less awareness amongst the public, and the expertise and all also are also right now, like every blood bank is not doing it. So we need to have a kickstart somewhere. Somewhere we have to start in, so that there are so many. In the state of Bangalore itself, we have around 500 people, patients in ICU. Dr. Vishal will be able to say more on that. So 500 people are sick with in ICU, and having that much number of plasma requires definitely a concerted effort. And so there's a definite role of plasma banks. But if other blood banks also pitch in, we'll be having more of it in multiple states and other states, definitely, sir.
Thank
And
you.
apart from ICU, definitely there are more patients who are going to be on going to move from the ward to ICUs. So just ICU beds are small in number, and there are huge number of more patients requiring it. So we need to have something in bigger amount for the plasma to be available.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Ashish. There are more questions, but we'll take it at the end of the session, as our next speaker, Dr. Shalini Nalwad, is waiting. So we'll start with the next talk, and then we will go on to the final discussions after Madam's talk. So Dr. Shalini Nalwad is the founder of ICAT. She's also the founder and the chief volunteer from the COVID India program. She has started, she's one of the founder members of Mission COPE, which is a COVID plasma endeavor. Welcome, ma'am. Dr. Shalini? Okay, while Dr. Shalini is setting up the screen, yes, ma'am, your screen is not visible to us.
Yes. 1 second. Right. Thanks, everyone. Sorry about that 2 seconds technical glitch. Of course, this is a life-saving campaign, and the COVID India campaign, which is done under the aegis of ICAT Foundation, has come forward to join hands with Dr. Vishal Rao and his team, HCG, to promote this in a very big way. And I would like to kind of start about a little bit of an introduction about COVID India campaign. I think most of you on this call might know us. So this is a campaign of 100 strong voluntary bodies, and the USP of this campaign is that we have a very strong team of IITians, IIM, CFOs, who have been putting nearly 1 lakh of volunteer hours since this COVID crisis started nearly 4 months ago. We have done multiple initiatives, from Save by Save campaign that is called the SOS campaign. We donated nearly 3 crore worth of PPEs and 95 other things across the world. We also developed an in-house splitter, ventilator, and also we have an innovation group called COVID Virtual Innovation Accelerator Group, where we bring in a lot of other new startups who are into the COVID-related startups and connect them to the stakeholders. And then this is our splitter group, and then we have done multiple presentations along with the Confederation of Indian Industries, and we written a cookbook on the ventilator. These are our partners. And I mean, I can talk about not just about the COVID India campaign, but about each and every single volunteer. If I can speak about them, I can do it kind of almost entire day, because this is an incredible team which has done some kind of mind-blowing, groundbreaking achievements in a matter of like literally 4 months time. So but I jump on straight away, because I know we are running out of time, into what exactly we are doing to promote this campaign, how we are bringing on people to connect up, and what exactly our plan of action is. So to begin with, we did a huge bang on the inauguration itself. we gave a red carpet welcome to the two donors who already donated twice, and the one who was going to donate that day. And they were brought by a luxury car, and they were welcomed and clapped by from the ministers to the MP, and also all the entire HCG and COVID India campaign team. So that itself kind of wanted to boost the morale of the people who have been positive so far and been the victim, and knowing India, how people are stigmatized there. Yesterday, probably you saw in Bangalore, one of the houses was kind of boarded, the kind of a shield was boarded into their walls, and it's been there are certain inhuman way that people are being treated. So we just wanted to make them the heroes of the day, so that more and more people come out of the stigma and donate. Because we had two challenges: one is to bring the donors on board, the other one is to make them donate as well. So there are two challenges which we have to kind of go in a very systematic manner to get this both done, to increase number of donors. So the next thing what we did was, is the entire event what we did on the inauguration was supported by the PR team, which was, again, it was all done pro bono, and the event team, Zero In and Lateral Thinking, COVID India campaign of founder volunteers, core team committee members, every single person in the COVID India campaign putting their hardest work into this to make this happen. Along with that, we also made, within 24 hours or 48 hours, we put in a beautiful video of the lot of celebrities together to promote this campaign. All these things, like, every single thing has been taken into consideration, and we, to create awareness, we need like quite a few things we need to do. First and foremost is the awareness about creating awareness through the social media campaign. So it could be a Facebook campaign, or it could be Instagram campaign, and also we're asking the celebrities to come on board to use their Twitters and Instagrams to kind of tweet regularly. Along with that, we have gone above the line campaign, like TV and television and radio and newspapers as well. And some of the political leaders, like Mr. Tejasvi Surya, has come forward to take this campaign personally, and he's already started doing that. Along with that, they also, Mr. Tejasvi Surya's team also monitored these quarantine groups, the quarantine people. So we are asking them in case if they can possibly go and start mentoring and start talking about this idea to these people who are positive at a very early stage, so they start kind of sinking this idea that they can become a donor and they can save another life. The second thing is technology wise, like as I said, our technology team is extremely strong. Mr. Sudeep himself spearheads this entire technology part, and we have a great web team and people like that. They are integrating a dashboard of all the plasma donors across the country. Like, if you look at it, there are every state, every district, every cities are coming up with these groups where they're coming and forming their own groups of WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, or little media campaigns to kind of register these positive people to become a donor. So what we are doing is we are bringing them all under one single platform, creating a state-wise dashboard, and the output will be only accessed by the zip code. Like, if Bangalore, Jayanagar is 56011, somebody would say, like, I'm in the Jayanagar Apollo Hospital. So that one we straight away connected to these people who are on the donor, so we can minimize the time of response. Along with that, along with Vishal Rao's team, we are coming up with like prioritization matrix, because there will be two people requiring the plasma at the same time of the same group. I think it has to be carefully, ethically triaged and given out, because it is a moral duty from our side as well to make sure the right people get the right resources, what is available. Along with that, we have another big, huge responsibility of connecting up the hospitals, that is to enroll themselves for this program, create awareness among them, setting up the plasma banks or plasma plasma apheresis units, where on the day our DCM said we can fast track the licensing process as well. So whatever the government is happy to support us, of course we are going to draw them out of it, suck them out of it, and make sure these hospitals at the district level, with the state level, kind of have smooth process in optimizing donations. And also the other thing is, like, a lot of
Dr. Shalini, we seem to have lost your feed.
As of our attending this meeting, Dr. Yash Zaveri, he's been the Intensive Care Society of India president, and we have Dr. Raghunath, who's also been the secretary for the Intensive Care Society of India. So people like them, they are under COVID India campaign medical task force. They will be promoting this in a big time in terms of enrolling the patients in their own hospitals who are positive at the very early stage when they come into the hospital. And look, you'll become you can donate in future when you recover, like after 14 days or whatever time as per the guidelines. So they are and also not only that, like if we look at in very successful campaigns which have happened so far in Delhi and Mumbai, when the doctors made this calls to the donors or the positive COVID recovered patients, it went up by 10x. So the data is extremely important, and calls done by the credible people, of course, makes a huge difference, increase motivation and also the morality of these people to come forward and donate. So we're also putting the operation in place where there could be plasma, could be transport. What is the quickest way to get the plasma across? Would we require ambulances? Would we require helicopters? Would we require fixed wing aircrafts? We can talk about it, because I had a air ambulance company, and then it is not a big deal for us to put all this in place either, like logistics, transport logistics. So end of the day, what I would like to say is, this is a campaign. It is not anything. It is not something like eye donation or any other, heart and lung donation campaign, because this is all those campaigns, all those programs have been going on for years together, and people know about it. But here the challenge is not just about it's a new campaign. It's also about the stigma where people have to come out of, and a lot of people might not want us to ring them and say, okay, you are a positive patient, and then that definitely leads to problem when they want to, when it comes to data, private patient confidentiality and privacy, things like that. It's a very sensitive issue, and at the same time, it's a need of the hour. We require it and we need it, and more data coming out. And also, as an intensivist, my friends across the world, like from Italy, Spain, or even in the UK or US, they are coming forward and saying, look, we are getting up to 50 to 60% better outcome when we are using plasma on the plasma trial group. I think we should make it a practice, definitely giving it a moderate stage than leaving it too late. So as we have to, Karnataka has one of the worst recovery rate, and this is the time where we have to step in and step up and bring every resource available to make this a huge success. And I would like to kind of ask every single person today who is sitting in or attending this meeting, if you go back and speak to 10 people, or as Dr. Vishal Rao said, at least we know a couple of people or 3 or 4 people who have been affected by COVID today. It could be colleagues, it could be family, it could be friends. Just talk to them, ask them to come forward. Just by today evening, we can have around 250 people, if 25 of us are here, to become the donors. And by saying this, I conclude this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shalini. You've been really instrumental in, connecting us and in setting up of the plasma bank as well. So, like you mentioned, I should have said that in your introduction that you're an intensivist as well. So, as an intensivist, one of the things that we find is that a lot of intensivists right now in the city of Bangalore itself are a little hesitant before, planning a plasma therapy. So, is there anything as an intensivist that you would like to, say to all the doctors in your community, that regarding the safety of the plasma therapy? And
see, there are only small risk about 1 in 10,000, as it was mentioned about the trolley. Other than that, I don't see anything. Like, when we do not have any definitive treatment, like for this COVID-19, what are we going to do? We reach out as intensive care is all about trial and error, and Dr. Raghunath and Dr. Yash Zaveri would definitely agree with me, because there is no set ventilator setting for cure somebody. There is no set, even we have thrown out gadgets like Swan-Ganz and things like that, because it's all about what individually tailor-make the treatment for every single person. So, of course, plasma showing promising results. Though there are a lot of big trials are yet to come out with the results, as an intensive, I would strongly promote, and with a careful patient selection, given at the right time, I think we can make a huge difference in terms of recovery.
Right, ma'am. Thank you. Also, there's a question about mass testing for COVID antibodies. Do you think it is feasible?
I think there is nothing called like COVID antibody, because we have to have somebody who has, because antibodies could be in anybody, anything. It could be another viral infection. But what is specific is whether they have been positive for COVID, and whether they have I mean, somebody is in cohort of like people working exposed to like a medical community or healthcare workers who was definitely working with COVID patients can understand that they have a positive antibody, and then it could be because they've been exposed to COVID. But otherwise, if you just checking the antibody, because we do not have like, you can't identify this antibody is because of COVID or non-COVID antibody, it could be viral, anybody could be viral. I think it has to be under the strict guidelines of whatever the ICMR or the WHO and Mayo Clinic all have been following. So I don't think so if mass testing of antibody is going to make any difference to this.
Right, ma'am. We have a comment from Dr. Swadeep. He says that if we meticulously track and record all these cases pan-India and across the world, we could publish these results in peer-reviewed journals. So this was a comment that Dr. Swadeep was making. There were some more questions to Dr. Ashish. Dr. Ashish, sir, are you here? Okay, so anyway, this is a question that I can put out to all the speakers. Ma'am, you can take this question as well. There is a lot of concern about the re-entry of these patients into the hospital. The recovered COVID patients, when they come back as donors, there is some misplaced concern that, when they come back to the hospital, how safe is it for them to come back and donate plasma? So, yeah.
I think Dr. Ashish is the right person to answer the way you guys have been handling this entire thing, segregating the plasma bleeding unit into a totally different entry, fumigating it, sterilizing it, restricted entry, taking the entire sterile precautions for the people coming in, giving the confidence that absolutely there is no way these people will be exposed to other COVID patients. And also HCG not being the COVID center, I think it makes more sense. Along with that, if, for example, if a hospital is a COVID hospital, I think the blood banks and bleeding places will be slightly away. So I think the separate entry has to be created and separate designated ambulance to bring these people. Or if not the ambulance, I think an ambulance can again stigmatize them. We could just provide a properly sanitized regular cars for bring taxi or the cars which are designated and particularly used for this purpose, properly sanitized and brought them back. I mean, they've had the COVID, they've already recovered, they're pretty immune, but at the same time, it is extremely important to reassure them that they can't, though there is a very, very small risk of them becoming positive. I think there's 0.3% risk of somebody becoming, picking up the infection. So we have to reassure that they are not coming into a, again, infected environment. And that is our responsibility.
Right. Also, there is a question on how would we control the charges to a recipient for plasma and develop a standardized cap charge. If Dr. Ashish is not here, Dr. Vishal sir, would you be willing to take this question? Okay, we seem to be having some connectivity issues with them. So if I can take these questions myself, the capping of the charges. So what we've done right now is for off-label plasma that we are giving, we have capped it based on the cost that the hospital incurs, and that alone. So we have developed basically a tariff plan for that also. How do we control these charges? Of course, with increasing numbers, I think the charges should come down significantly. So this is the best that probably I can give right now. More on this from Dr. Ashish Doot. There is another question on, are you giving remuneration to the donors? Are they asking for it? We have had a few inquiries, and the government also recently announced that the donors will be remunerated to up to a sum of 5,000 rupees. While this would definitely...
Only Karnataka government, just,
yes, only
so just to clarify.
This would encourage some donors to come forward. This is actually not very ethical. It does not fit into the ethics of blood donation and organ donation, and therefore there is a lot of confusion regarding this. We are still waiting for a formal communication from the government side. So I think we've covered almost all of the questions. I thank all of the speakers, Dr. Vishal Rao, Dr. Sachin Jadhav, Dr. Ashi Dut, and Dr. Shalini Alwad for joining us. Thank you, members and the participants that have asked really nice questions and made this an interactive session. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. We will call it a day today. Thank you.